Hey everyone, thank you for joining us to learn about some key new announcements on the ARBURG machines. My name's Alex. I am with the Würth Additive Group, and joining us we have our great partner, Gerry Berberian, to guide us through these exciting new details. But before we get started, if you have any questions, just feel free to type them in the question or the chat window, and we're going to go ahead and answer those at the end. But Gerry, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you, Alex. My name is Gerry Berberian. I am with ARBURG, and very excited today to tell you a little bit about some of our newest announcements. Before we jump in, some of you may or may not have joined us for some of our previous webinars. If you'd like to learn more about the ARBURG 3D printing process, also known as ARBURG Plastic Freeforming or APF, please take a trip over to the Würth YouTube channel and check out the webinars in our series. The first webinar really dives into the process, so you can get an excellent overview of the printing process, materials we use, and different applications. So what we're going to focus on today is two announcements that we announced very recently in the last few weeks. We're going to focus on high temp material processing and then on digital workflow. So we could apply these materials and process to any industry out there. However, there's two industries that these new capabilities seem to pop up often in. And those two specific industries that come to mind are aerospace and medical. They're two industries that both have high regulations to them. They both have regulation bodies from the federal government, both the FAA and the FDA, highly stringent material needs. And then, of course, along with those material needs comes certain traceability and trackability for both the materials and the process, both printing and production. And I like to say that both of those industries are on the cutting edge of technology. So let's take a look at how these new capabilities can help these industries.
Yeah, so this makes a ton of sense, Gerry. As we get into the applications, the validation and the quality control is especially critical for these industries.
I couldn't agree more, Alex. So before we dive into it, let's just take a quick look at what do we bring to the table here, right? What is the advantage? Why is ARBURG even making this announcement? So if you're in either of those industries, or if you're in another industry that uses high temperature materials, what we're offering now is the same material you're used to, right? It's pellet-based material. There's zero 3D printing additives. It's the same material you would use in the injection molding process, which means that the materials are pure. And the materials can be bought in the open market from material suppliers, which means that the cost is driven down significantly. We'll talk a little bit about this when we get further into the presentation, but when comparing costs from 3D printing suppliers to true manufacturing material suppliers, there's a monster gap. You're also going to see that the prints here with the freeformer are at a much higher density than you can achieve with traditional FFF or FDM. And I think you're going to see that the surface finish is excellent.
And all of this is especially important to note, as many of the folks in the additive world, they have experienced either knockoff materials, they have unknown origins, and it's really hard to produce the parts that they're looking for with products like that.
So let's take a quick look at aerospace. Additive parts have been in the aerospace industry for decades, but it's only been really in the last 5 to 10 years that additive parts have been certified for in-flight. A great example is Airbus. When they started the production of their A350 XWB aircraft back in 2014, they chose to produce more than 1,000 flight parts on their 3D printing systems in ULTEM 9085. And this choice enabled them to meet the delivery commitments that they had to their customers. Initially developed by General Electric Plastics Division, now SABIC, in the early 1980s, ULTEM is a high-performance plastic that has been the staple of the manufacturing industry for over 35 years. There's a specific grade of ULTEM, known as ULTEM 9085, that has become a staple in the aerospace industry, as well as the additive industry. Some of the reasons are, it has a very high strength-to-weight ratio, it's got a V0 flammability rating, and it's been approved by the FAA for in-flight parts. Many airplane, rocket, satellite manufacturers are taking advantage of this material, as well as their part suppliers. There's many advantages when you look at additive in aerospace. So one advantage could be low volume production. You know, we're looking at the needs of an aerospace manufacturer. Maybe they need 5 parts, 10 parts, maybe they need 100 parts. When you look at traditional manufacturing and the needs for creating a mold and then injecting material into that mold, the cost can go up significantly. So there's really a nice appetite for low volume parts with additive. Along with that, there's supply chain control. So you have the ability to better control that supply chain. You've got less risk of missed deadlines or shipping delays. And I think that is one of the reasons why Airbus chose to go in the direction they did. Also, there's a phrase we like to say called zero cost to complexity. And what that means is that with traditional manufacturing, such as say machining or molding, you've got limitations and a cost to each process as you add those processes up in order to create a certain design. And when engineers design parts, they have those limitations in mind, and that really does change how they design things. With AM, we don't have the same limitations, and the cost of producing a part does not increase based on the part's complexity, hence zero cost to complexity. On the same idea, assembly reduction. So this is another great feature of additive where we can create super complex parts and we can print them all as a single piece, when traditionally, if we were manufacturing these parts, because of the manufacturing limitations we may have, we often have to make several different pieces and then find ways to put them together to create an assembly. AM solves that issue. We can reduce the amount of parts in an assembly, and in some cases, reduce an entire assembly into one piece. So, I mean, the advantages there, I think, are pretty obvious, right? Less risk of mistakes, less inventory, less labor. It's all upside. Airbus was a great example of a company utilizing ULTEM and additive, but there are many others doing the same too.
Yeah, a great example would be NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. They utilize the ULTEM 9085 to produce the antenna arrays for their Cosmic 2 satellite. Also, United Launch Alliance, their Atlas V rocket used 3D printed parts, including brackets, nozzles, panel closeouts, all printed in ULTEM 9085, and this was back in 2016. But I think it's also important to note that around 60,000 aerospace parts have been certified to be 3D printed in ULTEM.
Wow, what a great stat. So ULTEM 9085 specifically. If you're in the aerospace industry, you're likely familiar with this, especially if you're familiar with additive. There's a lot of advantages. And as I mentioned earlier, what ARBURG'S processing can bring to the table is the same material you're used to. However, we're talking pure material, we're talking no additives. The material can be obtained directly from SABIC or one of their resellers. We utilize SABIC's breakaway support, so you know the model and the support interact well together. Looking at the cost of pellets versus filament, you're up to about 7x less than the cost of filament when you're using pellets. And then, as we mentioned before, you can get a higher density and a fantastic surface finish with the freeformer. Here you can see an example of an ULTEM 9085 part. So I wanted to showcase a little bit about cost. I know we've touched on it a few times already, but when you buy pellets by the pound, you clearly can get it significantly less expensive than buying material in filament form. Filament is made from pellets. There's additional costs that come with creating the filament. And then of course, there's additional costs because you're buying that filament either through a 3D printing supply company or through a material company. So if we took a look at, let's say, a standard material like ABS, what you can see here is the cost per cubic inch looking at filament versus pellets. You're talking about 35 times less when you buy pellets. That's a staggering number, in my opinion. Looking at an engineering material like ULTEM, where the prices are considerably higher, the cost delta there is a little bit lower, but we're still talking about 7x the markup going from pellets to filament. And this becomes really important when companies are evaluating additive for production, because cost per part in production is so critical. I've been in additive for coming on 14 years now, and I can recount many times when I've worked with companies to implement additive, and we've gotten to the point of additive makes a ton of sense. There's a lot of advantages to using additive. However, the cost per part using additive unfortunately killed the deal because the parts became too expensive. And here's the solution to that. All right, so jumping onto the medical side, ThermoPlast, a medical device manufacturing company and current ARBURG freeformer customer, describes a recent project involving the replacement of a meniscus component. One of their engineers stated, with the AFP process, we were able to manufacture a multi-material meniscus from different types of polyurethane within a few days, which enabled our client to immediately begin tests with the product. Without the freeformer, we would have to use an injection molded part and perhaps wait several months for the mold. He further added, in addition, tooling mistakes or multiple tooling design iterations can cause serious delays for product development and drastically impact associated costs. This is a great example of the advantages additive can bring to the table. To learn more about ThermoPlast and about this case, please visit the ARBURG website and you can download the case study. So additive in medical. Additive in medical is not new either. It's been around quite a long time. I would say well over a decade. In fact, I joined a recent webinar this past week, and a gentleman, Matthew DePrima of the FDA, stated that the first 3D printed pill was approved back in 2015, just to give you an idea of how far we've come. Well, there's a lot of examples that come to mind with what additive can be used for in medical. There's custom medical devices, patient-specific implants, anatomical modeling, dental implants, teeth alignment trays, and many, many more. And there's a lot of materials that can be used in additive. Here's a great example of a material. This is a bioresorbable material that would be implanted into the body and then over the course of several months would absorb back into the body so it wouldn't need to be removed. This is a fracture plate. So some other examples that come to mind. Drill and surgical guides are great examples. Surgical guides are used to assist doctors in guiding their tools into the exact area and the exact direction needed for the surgery. Each one provides a specific cut and helps reduce the deviation of the implant. Surgical guides can vary by person, and each guide is created for a patient's specific need. We use additive because it's quick and it's an inexpensive way to get these guides created. Another great example is custom surgical trays. So, imagine a customer is making a custom tool for a doctor, and that tool needs to be sterilized. Custom trays can be created to house those tools while they're sterilized and then transport them to the operating room. So with the medical industry expanding as rapidly as it is, there are tons of new applications that are coming to light all the time. As you saw from our SAMOPLAST example, ARBURG's 3D printing solution really aren't new. And current customers are utilizing these technologies, even placing their units in clean rooms. Being emission and dust-free, the freeformer suits a clean room very well. Customers are printing in a variety of materials, and what we're bringing now is a new high temperature module that gets us to the next level of materials. So the first group of materials I want to take a look at is ULTEM. And ULTEM comes in a variety of grades. So where we talked a little bit about the 9085 for aerospace, looking now at materials, the HU1010 or the HU1004, these are essentially PEI materials. The HU1004, this one is a fantastic material that we've used for medical devices and pharmaceutical applications. We've got some healthcare management change. It's got biocompatibility ratings, USP Class 6 and ISO 10993. Certified for food contact, and can be sterilized in numerous ways, including steam, gamma, ETO, or E-beam. The images you see here, this is a really interesting application. What you're seeing here is a company called Ascalab, which is a company of the Braun Group. They create patient-specific guides for knee surgery. And for many years, they've been using a powder-based 3D printing process in order to create these guides. However, the company could not guarantee the cleaning and the sterilization process removed all the loose powder. And with this risk, they started looking at other options to create these guides. They leaned on the freeformer as a replacement. And the reasons being is that the APF process, it ensures a clean part. The support material is dissolved away with water. The parts are biocompatible and sterilized very well. So they're currently evaluating that as a substitute. The next material brings us PEEK. So PEEK is polyether ether ketone, commonly known as PEEK. It's a high-performance engineered plastic, and it's a staple of the medical industry. Often used as a lighter weight option compared to metal implants. PEEK's primary uses started with spinal implants, patients with spinal stenosis, degenerative spinoditis, degenerative disc disease, degenerative scoliosis, and a slew of other spine-related diseases. And we've seen considerable relief by implanting PEEK spinal cages or spacers. The material success has led to further usage, such as skull implants, bone fixation pins and plates, orthopedic applications such as knee and hip arthroplasty, dental applications, and many more. PEEK is an ideal material for the medical applications, and even better when it's paired with additive technology. ARBURG brings a new high-temp module, and with that, we're able to get our nozzle up to 450 degrees C and our heated chamber up to 200 degrees C. And this enables PEEK printing. We've partnered with Evonik to use their VestaKeep PEEK material, which has an extra high purity and extended quality measures that make it an excellent choice for permanent implants. ARBURG, together with Evonik, can now offer an additive solution for implantable materials. Couple of images of some of the parts we've done. So along with printing, we also want to think a little bit about surface finish. Surface finish can be very important with implants. In order to do that, ARBURG partnered up with a company called OTEC. And OTEC processed a handful of parts for us in order to give us an option for post-processing. So it's really a two-step process, right? Step one, print the part, obvious step. Step two, we're going to go for a 4-hour wet grind with some ceramic abrasives, and then a 2-hour wet grind with plastic grinding chips. Step three is a 1-hour wet polish with a porcelain polishing media. Essentially, we're taking a surface that has about an RA value of 19.42 all the way down to an RA value of 0.46. To put some perspective around that, those of you who are familiar with the SLA process, that's just a touch better than what an SLA part can deliver. So let's take a look at some images. What you can see here on the left, if you look at our picture to the left, the part all the way to the left is freshly printed. As you move down to the right, we've got step one of polishing and then step two of polishing. Same on the right-hand side.
Yeah, and for those that haven't seen parts like this, the surface finish on these guys is next level. Really, the only traditional way to produce PEEK parts was from milling. And with that, you have a lot of waste and you miss out on the obvious cost savings that you get with additive. So great to look at those.
Yeah. All right. So the last section of our webinar, we're going to talk a little bit about process documentation. And ARBURG is announcing this new process tracking ability through our customer portal, ARBURG World, and through the PROCESSLOG app. So think of ARBURG's World as similar to the operating system of the smartphone, such as an iPhone or an Android. The phone has an operating system, and then as a user, you download apps for different activities you're interested in. And ARBURG's World operates exactly the same. ARBURG's World is the operating system, and then there's a variety of apps that you can download for different tasks. These apps range from machine health tracking to process tracking to remote service and so on. ARBURG's World is available across our entire portfolio for the molding systems all the way through the additive systems. So we're going to focus in now on an app called the PROCESSLOG. So the PROCESSLOG is an additive specific application that was created directly for the freeformer. This app tracks individual builds and supplies the tracking data associated with them. When we view a print job, the app starts with a nice overview page displaying all of the pertinent data that the user might want. And then there are tabs to dig in for more information on the build and the system stats. Underneath the system tab, we can see things like temperatures and pressures for each of our discharge nozzles and a variety of detailed parameters associated with the system during printing. We have a tab that shows messages, which is very nice for production tracking. If an error message occurs at any point during the build, that will be stored there and we can view that later. And then of course, there's material processing data. So such as graphs on the build chamber temperature and material melt pressures, drop frequency, and much, much more. So let's take an example of, take a look at what an example of this can look like. So here's a couple of screenshots from the PROCESSLOG. On the left-hand side, you can see some build parameters, including part dimension, platform position, and any scaling factors that might be applied. The material, feed rate, and so on is displayed there. On the right-hand side, we see a small section of processing data. Here we're including build temperature and melt pressures for the first extruder. You may notice that much of this is written in German. The obvious answer, of course, we have in English to this. When loading onto the system, logging onto the system at first, you can choose your language.
Not to mention, you could also download it on your phone. I found that out this morning.
Yeah, great point, Alex. So really interesting part of this, and I like what ARBURG did here. So there's 3 ways to make this data available when you want it. So you can export it as a PDF and get a nice single PDF, depending on how much data you want in there. It could be a 1-sheeter, it could be multiple sheets. You could export it in an Excel file or a CSV file. That might be a nice export if you're looking at a production environment where you have say an ERP tracking system that you want to load the data into. And then lastly, and this one I think is the most interesting, we can output a label with a QR code. And if the QR code is scanned, say you use your mobile device and you scan that QR code, it takes you right to that process data. And the great thing about this system is that as the user, you can choose what is displayed when you export. You can export all of the data, or you can pick and choose what data you feel is relevant for your process, and you can have the export only include that data. So let's demonstrate what it looks like. So here's an example of a medical implant that was done in PEEK. And we went into the process log, we chose the tracking data that we wanted to follow, and we created a label. And with that label, we got the QR code. And we took it a step further here. We took that QR code and we laser marked that QR code onto the medical device, now making that device permanently trackable. At any point in the lifetime of this device, that QR code can be scanned and that build data for that specific part can be viewed. The process log adds seamless monitoring, part-specific tracking, and documentation of process data. We see this particularly interesting for not only medical, but automotive, aerospace, and really anyone who's in a production environment that needs real process tracking for their environment.
Yeah, Gerry, as a supplier, that's really interesting because you have stringent quality controls all over the place in industry. Having the hardware to keep track, have product data, really helps with the liability and pinpointing issues.
All right, awesome. So in summary, we touched on a variety of material offerings now available at the high-tech processing module for our ARBURG freeformer. We touched on a couple of industries that those materials are prevalent in. We looked at ULTEM 9085 for some aerospace applications, ULTEM HU 1010 or 1004 for medical applications, of course, PEEK for medical applications. And lastly, we discussed the digital workflow and production tracking possible with our ARBURG'S World and PROCESSLOG. So thank you for joining us. And of course, if we mentioned anything that specifically interested you, if there was something else you wanted to talk about, or if you just wanted to dive further into the technology, please reach out to us at any point. We'd be more than happy to continue the discussion. And with that, let's take some questions.
Feel free to throw them in the chat, the questions box, whichever is easier. Looking like we're lucking out, Gerry. I don't have any questions yet.
All right. Well, why don't I start off with an answer to a question that might be asked. So one question would be, hey, when is this available? So the ULTEM versions, those materials can be available today. When it comes to PEEK printing, we're still dialing in a little bit of the PEEK printing in order to make the best PEEK parts possible. We're going to be able to create customer sample parts come March 2022, so just a couple months out. Of course, if you're interested in PEEK, we can start talking about that now, start looking at files, and we'll be able to print a part for you in no time. And of course, ARBURG'S World and the process log is available right now.
Also to note that for the prize, the marketing team will be in touch with the winners for the t-shirt and the ULTEM print giveaway. So everyone here that has attended will be entered in that process.
All right, fun. Excellent. Well, unless anyone has any questions, which it looks like not, thank you everyone for joining us, and I hope you found this interesting and informative. Have a great rest of your day. Everyone.